Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
I'm all for variation and having as much variety as possible when it comes to football boots, but this new version of the F50 that you probably didn't know about is about as pointless as it gets. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Adidas F50 Elite AG, the version of the new F50 made specifically for use on artificial grass, the deeper kind with the rubber pellets scattered throughout, with an upper that is basically identical to what you'll find on the FG model with the same retail price of $260. However, when you put the AG version side by side with the FG version, you might say to yourself, is there really that much of a difference? I would personally argue that there isn't, and the changes that they have made, I would also argue might be for the worst. Which is why in today's video, we're gonna go over all the details of the AG F50 Elite, talk about who these might actually be for, how they differ from the FG model, and whether or not you should be considering these if you're in need of a pair of football boots specifically for use on artificial grass. So if you're interested in learning more, including how they fit and feel on feet, please stick around. And if you are interested in a pair of the new F50s for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the first link down below. And as always, if you enjoy the unsugar-coated, brutally honest content on the channel, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. So first things first, the stud pattern. Really the main reason why you would buy any pair of AG football boots, and there's a couple different reasons that we'll go over in this video why you might want to consider an AG specific pair if you regularly play on artificial grass. But speaking specifically on the F50 Elite, you'll definitely notice that the stud pattern is different from the FG version in that instead of bladed studs, you're going to find more conical studs pretty much all the way throughout, with the only exception being these four kind of bladed studs with this focus around rotational movement under the ball of the forefoot. Very similar, I guess, to something like the Phantom Luna, but not necessarily something that I would say is unique to Nike, although if you really wanted to compare this design to something, it's very reminiscent of the FG CTR 360 stud pattern from the original Maestri 1. Not quite exactly the same, but you get the idea. It's not until you take the AG model and put it side by side with the standard FG one that you might start to question why this is actually better for use on artificial grass, where again, less blades is obviously going to provide less aggressive traction. And when you're talking about safety in a pair of football boots, particularly on artificial grass, having too much grip and not having that freedom to twist and pivot when your foot is planted can actually increase your risk of injury. So having rounded studs is definitely better. However, when you're talking about AG specific stud patterns, the length of the studs, as you can see from the side profile, is pretty well identical to that of the FG model. And typically for an AG boot of any kind, you actually want slightly shorter studs, not just to make for the appropriate amount of traction, but also to help in reducing stud pressure, as well as just generally providing better stability, because on any artificial grass field, granted some are a little bit deeper than others, it does tend to be a fairly shallow surface, so you never want those studs hitting the bottom. And if you are playing on a shallower AG pitch, there's really not going to be a whole lot of benefit to this AG stud pattern over the FG one, especially considering the main body of the FG stud pattern is made up of what are more or less conical studs, which is confusing because on the AG one, that's the only place where they've put some additional blades, where if anything, this clings a little bit more in the forefoot on an AG surface than what the FG version does. Not to say that this necessarily feels unsafe, but in terms of actually benefiting you, the consumer, for your choice to go for an AG stud pattern, I just personally don't see or feel the benefit. Realistically, the biggest or at least most noticeable difference in traction between these two stud patterns is more so going to be the additional stud on the edge of the forefoot, just running a little bit further back, and then having these four just generally closer together than what you'll find on the FG model. But because of the differences in the sole plate, where this features their Sprint Frame 360, and this, while it looks like a Sprint Frame 360, is actually what they're calling their AG traction frame. So you can see the heel counter is slightly different, although pretty much the same in terms of feel. And the Soleplate design, while still having kind of 3 ribs through the middle, it's a little bit stiffer through the forefoot and generally just has a bend point or a flex point that's a little bit further back that in general doesn't feel quite as good. And if anything, the stud pressure, while I don't necessarily think it's an issue with either of these boots, you can feel more studs underneath your feet with the AG version than you can with the FG model, which should not be the case given that the AG model is technically supposed to be used on a shallower playing surface. And then there's the weight, where given that these two boots pretty well have the exact same upper, and the thickness of the sole plates, despite the design differences, appear to be and feel to be pretty much identical as well, I wouldn't expect there to be a big weight difference between these two versions, but of course the scale doesn't lie. Both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the FG model, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.7 ounces, the equivalent of 190 grams, which of course is very lightweight, what you'd expect from a top-end pair of speed boots. Then we have the AG model, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.5 ounces, the equivalent of 184 grams. That's a weight difference of 6 grams in favor, surprisingly, of the AG model, which when you're talking about a top-end pair of speed boots, that would typically be viewed as a good thing. However, when you're talking about a boot designed specifically for artificial grass, a much more abrasive, harder on your shoes playing surface, you would at the very least expect them to weigh the same as the FG model, if not a little bit more, especially given that you technically have an extra stud in the forefoot, but not the case here with the AG F50 Elite for whatever reason. Speaking of durability, typically what we'll find with a lot of AG football boots is some level of reinforcement to the upper. However, in the case of the AG F50 Elite, it's the same fiber touch upper with the same sprint web texturing. Nothing about the design is different outside or inside, and even along the forefoot and toe box area, where typically you'll find an extended lip to the sole plate, or at least a plastic insert kind of reinforcing this high wear zone on the upper, that is not present whatsoever on this AG version of the football boot. So from a durability perspective, especially given the fact that this doesn't appear to be a thicker plastic sole plate either, I wouldn't necessarily expect the AG version of the F50 Elite to outlast the FG model on the same playing surface. With that said, durability is one of those things that's pretty much impossible to predict, and given how new the F50 Elite is, nobody really has a true baseline on how long you could expect these to last, nor could anybody really predict that accurately because everybody wears boots in different ways at different rates. There's just so many variables to that aspect of football boot wear. With that in mind, if you are regularly or exclusively playing on artificial grass and something were to go wrong with your football boots, Adidas, as well as any other brand for that matter, does reserve the right to refuse your warranty claim if you're wearing an FG pair on artificial grass, because if they break, technically you're wearing a pair of football boots on a playing surface they were not intended for. In other words, if more often than not you do play on artificial grass and you really want a new pair of F50s, you would be doing yourself a disservice by not going for the AG pair should something go wrong. But that's really the only reason. On feet, perhaps unsurprisingly, there aren't many differences between the AG and FG variations of the F50 Elite, and honestly, if you've never tried the FG variation, I don't think you would even notice these things at all. But for me, something that stands out is that the sole plate through the forefoot is just that little bit stiffer in a way where it just flexes less naturally than the standard FG model, not in a way that feels more responsive. So personally, I don't think it feels quite as good. And also, these 4 studs kind of prioritizing those rotational movements according to the graphic do have a little bit of kind of a stud pressure sensation on my feet. Although that's something that I think could vary quite significantly from person to person, but especially given that this is an AG stud pattern made for a shallower surface, the fact that I can feel studs under my feet at all isn't necessarily a good thing. And realistically, we're kind of being generous in calling this an AG stud pattern because at the end of the day, there's not much AG specific about it. The studs are an FG length, the shape are an FG shape. It just isn't that specialized AG stud pattern that we've seen from Adidas in the past, as well as what we currently can get from other brands. So it's a little bit disappointing in that regard. Other than that, the upper feels fantastic. The fit of the new F50 Elite, I think, is also phenomenal. It's got a nice tight wrap without feeling like it's squeezing or suffocating your feet in any way at all. Plenty of adjustability because of that nice deep central lacing system, and a width that I think will be suitable for most people, as long as you don't have excessively wide feet, and of course, if you like that tighter fit overall. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, I am very much pro AG stud patterns, especially when it comes to people that regularly play on artificial grass. I think there is definite benefit to them as it relates to general injury prevention, as well as just overall comfort, not to mention how long your boots are going to last. However, in the case of the AG F50 Elite, can I wholeheartedly say that I truly believe that this AG model is better for use on artificial grass than the FG model? No. The Soleplate feels better on the FG model, and the stud patterns feel and perform almost exactly the same on both natural as well as artificial playing surfaces, where basically my recommendation is this. As I said earlier in the video, if you play almost exclusively on artificial grass, you should get the AG model, because should there be an issue with durability, you'll be able to make a warranty claim. But if you only play on artificial grass once in a while, you mostly play on natural grass fields, I would strongly recommend going for the FG variation and just using them on artificial grass the odd time that you have to.